I was lying in a hospital bed, hooked up to a chemo machine, fighting for my life. My mother walked in, looked me dead in the eye, and told me they were cutting off my medical funds. Why? Because my younger brother got accepted into Columbia, and my cancer would probably come back anyway. She actually told me not to be selfish. I didn't know it yet, but that wasn't even the sickest part of their plan. Before I tell you how this all ended, and how I took everything from them, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Grab a warm cup of coffee, sit down, and listen to the whole story. The rhythmic, high-pitched beeping of the 4-pump was the only sound in the sterile room when my mother walked in. I was 24 years old, and I was exactly halfway through a grueling, brutal chemotherapy protocol for acute leukemia. I was finally starting to see the light at the end of a very dark, terrifying tunnel. My blood counts were improving. The exhaustion was still heavy, pulling at my bones every time I tried to sit up, but the agonizing, deep tissue ache that had completely defined the last few months of my life was finally lifting. I was winning. I was actually going to survive. Evelyn, my mother, didn't bring flowers this time. She didn't have that perfectly practiced, soft look of maternal concern she usually wore like a mask whenever the hospital nurses were hovering around my bed. She closed the heavy wooden door quietly behind her, making sure it clicked shut. She walked over to the edge of my bed, her heels clicking sharply against the linoleum floor, and sat down in the visitor's chair. Her posture was completely rigid. Her face was a mask of cold calculation. "Mason, we need to talk about your treatment costs," she began. Her voice was completely flat, entirely devoid of any warmth or emotion. I blinked, my brain still a bit foggy from the heavy anti-nausea medications pumping through my veins. "What about them? Dr. Elijah just told me yesterday that the insurance is covering the bulk of the big procedures, and the rest is coming directly from the health savings account. We're on track." She smoothed an invisible wrinkle on her expensive designer skirt, refusing to look me in the eye. "Yes, well, things have changed. Carter got his acceptance letter from Columbia University yesterday morning. Carter, my 19-year-old brother, the golden child, the absolute center of their universe since the day he took his first breath." "That's great," I rasped, struggling to push myself up a little higher against the stiff hospital pillows. "But what does his college acceptance have to do with my cancer treatment?" She sighed. It was the kind of heavy, dramatic, burdened sigh a parent gives a toddler who is asking too many annoying questions. "Columbia is extremely expensive, Mason. The tuition, the housing in New York City, the lifestyle he needs to network properly. We've looked at the numbers, and we've decided we need to redirect the family funds. We are stopping the payments for your chemotherapy after this week. The college fund takes priority." The air instantly left my lungs. The heart monitor next to me spiked loudly, its steady rhythm turning into a rapid, frantic tempo. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, waiting for her to say it was some kind of terrible, sick joke. You're cutting off my treatment?" My voice broke, sounding weak and pathetic in the quiet room. "Mom, Dr. Elijah said if I stop the protocol right now, the cancer comes back much worse. I will literally die." She didn't flinch. She looked right into my eyes with a coldness that still gives me terrible nightmares to this day. "You've had a good run, Mason, but let's be realistic here. Your cancer will probably come back anyway down the line. Why drain our family finances prolonging the inevitable? Carter's elite education is an investment in the future of this family. You shouldn't be selfish about this. We will make sure you are comfortable at the end. We've even looked into some affordable funeral arrangements so you don't have to worry about the logistics when the time comes." My own mother, sitting on my hospital bed, calling me selfish for wanting to survive. She was actively choosing to fund my brother's college experience with the exact money that was currently keeping me alive. My jaw clenched so hard I thought my teeth would shatter. My hands shook violently as I gripped the thin, scratchy hospital blanket. I couldn't speak. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal paralyzed my vocal cords. She stood up, gave my shoulder a pathetic, light pat, and walked out of the room. The door clicked shut, leaving me entirely alone. But the absolute truth is, I had always been alone in that family. To understand how a mother could look her dying son in the eye and tell him his life wasn't worth the cost of a college dorm room, you have to understand the 24 years that led up to that exact moment. Growing up, there were two very distinct realities operating under the roof of our suburban home. There was Carter's world, which was bathed in sunlight, endless praise, and unconditional support. And then there was my world, a quiet, invisible existence lived entirely in the shadows. When I was 8 years old, I won the regional science fair for the entire district. I had spent 6 weeks building a fully working model of a renewable energy city out of recycled electronic parts one found in the trash. I was so incredibly proud. I remember standing in the middle of the massive school gymnasium, holding this heavy, shiny trophy, waiting for my parents to pick me up. I waited for 2 hours. The gym slowly emptied out. The janitor started sweeping the floors and turning off the overhead lights. I finally walked to the payphone and called home. Nobody answered. It started raining. It wasn't just a light drizzle, but a torrential, freezing autumn downpour. I walked 2 whole miles home in the dark, clutching that plastic trophy against my chest to protect it from the water. When I finally walked through the front door, soaked to the absolute bone, shivering uncontrollably, the house was filled with people. There were colorful balloons everywhere, a massive catered food spread on the dining table, and a huge banner hanging across the living room that read, "Congratulations, Carter." Carter, who was 3 years old at the time, had successfully completed a week of potty training. That was the cause for the celebration. My mother looked over at me, her face twisting in annoyance as rainwater dripped from my hair onto her pristine hardwood floor. "Mason, go to the mudroom immediately. You're making a terrible mess. And put that junk away," she said, gesturing vaguely to my first-place trophy. That single night was the defining dynamic of my entire childhood. When Carter turned 10, he got a custom-built treehouse in the backyard and a lavish party with 50 guests. When I turned 10, I got a brief pat on the back and a laminated chore list for the summer. I learned very early on to stop asking for things. I started doing my own laundry in the 3rd grade. I packed my own lunches every single morning. I walked to school every day in the freezing cold while my dad drove Carter in his heated, luxury SUV, even though my middle school was directly on the way. Whenever I dared to question the blatant unfairness, the intense psychological gaslighting began. "We love you both equally, Mason," my father would say, not even bothering to look up from his newspaper or his phone. "You're just being overly sensitive again. You have a terrible habit of imagining things that aren't there." When I was 17, I earned a partial scholarship to an elite summer coding boot camp at a prestigious university. It was the kind of opportunity that could have set up my entire professional career. I just needed my parents to cover the remaining $500 and drive me 3 hours to the campus. My mother didn't even glance at the official acceptance letter. "That's nice, Mason, but Carter has his travel baseball league playoffs that entire month. We can't possibly afford the time or the money to drive you around. He needs to build his sports resume for his college fund." I watched them pack up the family car every single weekend for Carter's baseball games, leaving me entirely alone in a quiet house with a frozen pizza and a tall stack of library books. I realized right then that I was merely a background character in their perfect family portrait. I wasn't a son. I was an inconvenient obligation they were simply waiting to age out. So, the very day after I graduated from high school, I packed my bags into a cheap duffel bag and left. I didn't ask them for a dime. I didn't look back. The next 6 years of my life were a blur of pure, exhausting, relentless grind. I worked 2 terrible jobs just to put myself through a local state college. I ate cheap instant ramen almost every night, lived in a cramped, drafty apartment with 3 messy roommates, and slept maybe 4 hours a night if I was lucky. I was fiercely determined to prove to the world, and to myself, that I didn't need them. I didn't need their money, their fake approval, or their perfectly manicured, hypocritical lives. By the time I turned 24, things were finally clicking into place. I had landed a very solid, entry-level job at a rapidly growing tech logistics firm in the city. I was willingly working 60-hour weeks, putting in overtime, gunning for a massive promotion and a salary bump that would finally give me the financial security I had craved my entire life. I was building a life entirely on my own terms. The only remaining tie I still had to my parents was my health insurance policy. Under U.S. law, I could legally stay on their family plan until I was 26, and since I had been paying a portion of my own salary into our shared family health savings account for years, my father convinced me it made financial sense to keep it that way. Then, out of nowhere, the bruises started appearing. First, I brushed it off. I thought I was just clumsily bumping into desks at the busy office. But they started appearing everywhere. Dark, angry purple marks on my legs, my arms, across my ribcage. Then came the bone-crushing, unexplainable fatigue. I would physically drag myself to my office desk, my vision frequently blurring, my heart pounding erratically just from walking up a single flight of stairs. I ignored it. I had spent my entire life ignoring physical and emotional pain because complaining never got me anywhere in my childhood. I aggressively popped over-the-counter painkillers, drank incredibly dangerous amounts of highly caffeinated energy drinks, and kept my eyes entirely focused on that upcoming promotion. Until a random Tuesday afternoon in late November. I was standing in the drab office break room, pouring a cup of stale coffee, when the room suddenly and violently tilted. The buzzing fluorescent lights overhead flared blindingly bright. A high-pitched ringing pierced my eardrums, and the linoleum floor rushed up to meet my face. I woke up hours later to the harsh, sterile smell of a hospital emergency room, and 4-line was already securely taped into my arm. A doctor with kind, incredibly tired eyes, Dr. Elijah, was standing over my bed holding a thick clipboard. "Mason," he said gently, his tone instantly telling me my life was about to change. "Your blood work came back from the lab. It's not good." He explained the white blood cell counts, the aggressive blast cells, the terrifying nature of it all. Acute myeloid leukemia. It was advanced. My body was completely failing me. I laid there, staring blankly at the ceiling tiles, processing the cruel fact that my relentless drive to outrun my miserable past had crashed headfirst into a wall of diseased, mutating cells. The hospital staff automatically contacted my emergency contacts on file. My parents. I fully expected them to just send a polite text message, or maybe make a brief, uncomfortable phone call from their living room. Instead, less than an hour later, they burst through the hospital emergency doors like a chaotic hurricane of absolute grief. My mother literally threw herself onto my hospital bed, sobbing uncontrollably into the blankets. She stroked my hair, hot tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face, crying out loudly about how unfair the world was, how her precious, beautiful boy was suffering so much. My father stood stoically at the foot of the bed, his face pale and drawn, repeatedly wiping his eyes with a cloth handkerchief. For the first time in my entire 24 years of existence, I was the absolute center of their attention. They brought expensive helium balloons. They ordered lavish takeout from my favorite restaurants. They sat in those horribly uncomfortable plastic chairs next to my bed for hours on end while the very first round of brutal, toxic chemotherapy dripped slowly into my veins. When my hair started falling out in massive, terrifying clumps a few weeks later, my mother actually held my hand tightly and told me I was the bravest person she had ever known. It was incredibly intoxicating. The chemotherapy was actively destroying my body, making me violently ill for days, stripping away every ounce of my physical dignity. But emotionally, I had never felt so secure and safe. The deeply wounded little boy inside me who had walked home alone in the freezing rain finally felt seen and validated. I foolishly allowed myself to believe that the sheer terror of losing a child had snapped them awake. They realized they actually loved me. 3 long, agonizing months passed. The treatment protocol was aggressive, keeping me confined to the oncology ward, but Dr. Elijah was incredibly optimistic. "You're a fighter, Mason," he told me one morning, happily reviewing the results of my latest bone marrow biopsy. "The cancer is responding beautifully to the drugs. The blast cells are dropping rapidly. We just need to finish the remaining protocol. If we stay the course right now, your chances of total, long-term remission are incredibly high. I actually cried tears of joy when he told me that. My mother hugged me tightly, and my father squeezed my shoulder with what felt like genuine pride. I thought we had survived the ultimate nightmare together. I thought the cancer, ironically, had been the tragic event that finally saved my family. I was an absolute fool. The reality was much, much darker. The beautiful illusion completely shattered on a random Tuesday afternoon. I was mindlessly scrolling through social media on my phone, desperately trying to distract myself from the lingering, awful nausea of my latest chemo round. Carter's face suddenly popped up on my feed. It was a high-quality picture of him standing proudly in our parents' wide suburban driveway. He was holding up a crimson-red folder, an official acceptance letter from Columbia University. But the letter wasn't the focal point of the photo. Parked directly behind him, gleaming in the sunlight with a massive, ridiculous red bow stuck to the hood, was a brand-new, jet-black Porsche 911. The caption below the photo read, "Columbia bound. Huge thanks to the absolute best parents in the world for the ultimate graduation gift. Next stop NYC." I stared at the glowing screen until my eyes physically burned. A Porsche. I knew cars well enough to know that was easily a $100,000 vehicle. Maybe significantly more with custom options. I knew my parents did well financially in their careers, but they certainly weren't billionaires. They were upper middle class at best. Buying a luxury sports car outright was a massive liquid cash drop. My mind started racing, frantically connecting dots I desperately didn't want to connect. The health savings account they controlled. The insurance deductibles they had been complaining about. The hushed, tense conversations I had seen my parents having in the hallway outside my room lately when they thought I was asleep. Exactly 2 hours after I saw that post, my mother walked into my hospital room and delivered her horrific speech. The speech where she coldly told me they were permanently cutting off my medical funds. The speech where she called me a selfish burden for wanting to live. As she walked out of the room, leaving me completely alone with the rhythmic beeping of the life-saving machines I was about to lose, the terrible math finally clicked into place. They didn't run out of money. They didn't hit a sudden financial wall. They looked at their bank accounts. They looked at the projected cost of my remaining, life-saving chemotherapy cycles. They looked at the exorbitant cost of Carter's Ivy League tuition and his shiny new sports car. And they made a conscious, calculated choice. My continued existence was simply a frustrating expense that was interfering with Carter's elite lifestyle. The 3 months of tears and hand-holding weren't born of sudden maternal love. They were performing. They were playing the role of tragic, dedicated parents for the benefit of the hospital staff, just waiting for the most convenient moment to pull the plug without looking like absolute monsters to the outside world. The sorrow evaporated from my chest instantly. The desperate little boy who wanted his mother's love died right there in that hospital bed. What replaced him was a cold, hard, unyielding fury. They thought I was just going to roll over, accept my fate, and die quietly so they could keep up appearances. They picked the wrong son to abandon. The exact second the heavy door clicked shut behind my mother, I didn't shed a single tear. I didn't panic or hyperventilate. The sheer audacity of her betrayal flipped a massive switch deep inside my brain. The lingering weakness in my limbs vanished, instantly replaced by a massive surge of pure, survival adrenaline. I violently grabbed my phone from the bedside table. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a rage so profound and deep it felt like raw electricity humming under my skin. I didn't have the personal savings to pay for the remaining expensive treatments out of pocket. My parents legally controlled the specific health savings account I had been paying my salary into for years, holding it under their family umbrella policy. If I missed the next crucial cycle of chemo, the mutated cells would multiply rapidly. The leukemia would return with a vengeance, completely immune to the drugs that were currently saving my life. I hit the red nurse call button clamped to my bed rail. I hit it over and over, smashing my thumb against the plastic until it cracked. A startled nurse rushed into the room, but I bypassed her completely. "Get Dr. Elijah." Now, tell him it is a massive, life-or-death financial emergency. Dr. Elijah practically sprinted into the room 5 minutes later, his stethoscope swinging wildly around his neck. Mason, what's wrong? Are you in pain? Your vitals are. My parents are cutting off my funding. I interrupted, my voice sharp, clear, and devoid of any weakness. My mother just left this room. She told me they are redirecting all the money to my brother's college tuition. They are officially refusing to authorize the insurance copays and locking me completely out of the savings account. Dr. Elijah stopped dead in his tracks. The professional, incredibly calm demeanor he always carried around the ward shattered instantly. His jaw tightened so hard I could hear his teeth grind, and a visible blue vein throbbed angrily on his temple. Excuse me? They are doing what to you? I repeated it word for word. I told him about the social media post with the Porsche. I told him about the Columbia tuition priority. I told him she actually said my cancer would probably come back anyway. I watched a deeply compassionate healer turn into a furious, relentless advocate right before my eyes. Dr. Elijah slammed his heavy clipboard onto the bedside table, sending a plastic cup clattering to the floor. Absolutely not, he growled, his voice vibrating with rage. Stopping your protocol right now is medically catastrophic. You are in the absolute most critical phase of recovery. If we halt the chemo now, everything we've done is wiped out. You will crash immediately, and your chances of survival will drop to 0. He pulled out his hospital pager, his fingers flying across the buttons. They think they can just walk away from a dependent patient mid-treatment because of a car? Not in my hospital. I am paging social services and our chief legal liaison right now. He looked down at me, his eyes burning with an intense, protective fire. You focus on resting and staying strong. Let me handle the monsters. 20 minutes later, a sharply dressed man named Wyatt walked into my hospital room. He was the senior hospital social worker, a guy who looked like he had seen the absolute worst of humanity over decades of work and was entirely unfazed by it. He pulled up a chair, opened a thick yellow legal pad, and didn't offer any empty, annoying platitudes. Dr. Elijah briefed me on the situation, Wyatt said, aggressively clicking his pen. I need you to tell me everything, not just what happened today. I need the entire family history. Establishing a long-term pattern of extreme neglect and financial manipulation is exactly how we break their legal control over your medical assets. I told him. I poured out 24 painful years of being a complete ghost in my own family. I told him about the science fair in the rain, the canceled summer camp, the extreme, blatant favoritism shown to Carter. I explained in detail how my hard-earned salary had been systematically funneled into the family health savings account because my father aggressively convinced me it was smarter for taxes, effectively trapping my own money under his legal name. Wyatt wrote furiously, his expression growing darker by the minute. It's classic financial abuse, he stated flatly, not looking up from his notes. They are weaponizing legal loopholes to completely control your access to life-saving care. Because you are legally an adult on their policy and they are the primary account holders, they think they hold all the cards and can just starve you out. He paused, looking me dead in the eye with absolute seriousness. Mason, I have an incredibly aggressive attorney on speed dial who specializes in medical rights and financial emancipation cases. His name is Gabriel. He does pro bono work for patients in life-threatening crises. We are going to file an emergency legal injunction tomorrow morning. We are going to drag your parents into court, freeze that savings account immediately, and force the insurance company to deal exclusively with you. Can we actually do that in time? I asked, my voice finally betraying a tiny hint of the immense fear bubbling inside me. My next scheduled chemo cycle is in exactly 4 days. We have to, Wyatt replied, his tone leaving no room for doubt. Or you die. It's really that simple. The hospital's legal machinery started turning rapidly behind the scenes. Gabriel, the lawyer Wyatt recommended, took my case immediately over the phone. I was strictly instructed by my legal counsel not to contact my parents under any circumstances. The next afternoon, the door to my room opened, and my best friend, Julian, walked in. Julian and I had been incredibly close since our freshman year of high school. He intimately knew my terrible family dynamic. He knew exactly how hard I had worked to get away from them and build my own life. "Man, you look terrible," Julian said, offering a weak, overly forced smile as he sat down heavily in the visitor chair. "It's the chemo," I replied, genuinely relieved to see a familiar, friendly face. "But it's actually working. Listen, man, things have gotten totally insane. My parents just—" "I know," Julian interrupted softly. He looked down at his expensive sneakers, deliberately avoiding my gaze. "Your mom called me last night." A cold, terrifying prickle of dread instantly washed over the back of my neck. "She called you? Why would she call you?" Julian shifted incredibly uncomfortably in the plastic chair. "Mason, you need to look at this logically, okay? You're dragging your family through the mud. Your mom is a total wreck. She said you're threatening to sue them, freeze their bank accounts right when Carter is trying to set up his future in New York." I stared at him, my brain struggling to process the words coming out of my best friend's mouth. The room suddenly felt very small and devoid of oxygen. "They are trying to stop my cancer treatment, Julian. They literally bought him a Porsche instead of paying for my chemo." "It's their money, Mason." Julian's voice suddenly rose, a harsh, defensive edge to it. And look at you. You're suffering so much. Your Aunt Sarah told me the doctors are just giving you false hope to pad their bills. Maybe it's time to just accept things, you know? Go into a nice hospice program. Stop tearing your family apart over a few extra months of pain. My blood turned to absolute ice. Aunt Sarah, the ultimate, gossiping manipulator of the family who had always hated me. But hearing Julian, my closest confidant, parrot their sick talking points, it didn't make any sense. Then I noticed it. Peeking slightly out of the inner front pocket of Julian's jacket was a thick, white bank envelope. The flap was loose. I could clearly see the crisp, green edge of $100 bills. "Did they pay you?" I asked. My voice was dangerously quiet, cutting through the hum of the medical equipment. Julian's hand flew to his jacket pocket, his face instantly draining of all color. "Mason, no, listen, it's not like that. Your dad just gave me some cash to help with gas and to make sure I came down here to talk some sense into you. They love you, man. They just want peace. They bought my best friend. They literally handed him a stack of cash to come to my deathbed and convince me to give up and die quietly to save them a legal headache." "Get out," I snarled, pointing a shaking, bruised finger at the door. "Mason, come on, be reasonable. Get out," I screamed, the heart monitor blaring a loud warning in response to my skyrocketing pulse. "Tell my parents they wasted their damn money. And if you ever show your face near me again, I will have hospital security drag you out by your hair." The universe apparently wasn't done testing my breaking point that week. Just 24 hours after Julian's pathetic, paid visit, my brother Carter showed up. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, looking incredibly out of place in the oncology ward. He was wearing a ridiculously expensive designer hoodie and the limited edition sneakers my parents had bought him last month. He looked perfectly healthy, vibrant, and incredibly nervous. He slowly walked in and stood rigidly at the foot of my bed. "Hey, Maze." I didn't greet him. I just stared at him, letting the heavy, oppressive silence stretch out until it became physically suffocating. I deliberately let him look at the plastic tubes protruding from my chest, my deeply sunken eyes, my pale, sickly skin. I wanted him to see exactly what his new Porsche was costing me. "Mom is completely losing her mind," Carter finally blurted out, unable to handle the intense silence any longer. "Dad is screaming at lawyers on the phone in the living room. They said you filed some kind of emergency court order to freeze their bank accounts." "I did," I said evenly, showing zero emotion. "Because they stole the health savings money I contributed to for years, and they are trying to permanently cancel my life-saving medical treatment. Carter looked down, his shoulders slumping defensively. I didn't ask for the car, Mason. I swear to God. I told them it was way too much. But Mom insisted it was for appearances when I get to New York. I don't give a damn about the car, Carter. I snapped, my thin patience completely evaporating. I care that my mother sat in that exact chair you're standing next to, looked me dead in the eye, and told me I should stop being selfish and just die so she could easily pay for your tuition. Carter flinched violently, as if I had physically struck him across the face. She didn't say that. She did. And deep down, you know she did. I leaned forward, fighting through a sudden wave of nausea. So here is exactly where we stand, little brother. I am taking them to court. I am going to expose everything they have done. The financial abuse, the medical neglect, all of it. They are going to look like absolute monsters to the entire world. Carter's eyes widened in genuine panic. Mason, please. This is going to ruin everything. The local press, the neighbors. My admission to Columbia could get flagged and revoked if we are involved in a massive public legal scandal. Always the golden child. Always exclusively worried about the resume and the optics. I am fighting for my life, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper that echoed in the quiet room. You are worried about what the country club neighbors think. You have a massive choice to make right now, Carter. You can stand with them, protect your elite tuition and your sports car, and be a silent accomplice to my murder. Or you can stand up, be a man for the very first time in your entire life, and tell the truth about what goes on in that house. I didn't raise my voice, but the immense weight of the words visibly crushed him. He stood there for a long minute, tears welling in his eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The cowardice was too deeply ingrained in him. He turned around and walked out of the room without saying a single word. Fine. If they all wanted a war, I was going to give them one. The legal retaliation from my parents was incredibly swift and unimaginably dirty. They hired a high-powered, absolutely ruthless defense lawyer named David. He was the kind of guy who wore $1,000 custom suits and made a very lucrative living destroying innocent people's reputations to protect his wealthy, guilty clients. Just 2 days after my lawyer Gabriel filed our emergency injunction, David fired back with a legal motion that made my stomach turn completely inside out. Gabriel came into my room early in the morning, his face incredibly grim, and handed me the thick stack of legal documents. Read it and try not to throw up, Gabriel said, leaning heavily against the windowsill and rubbing his temples. I aggressively scanned the pages. David had drafted an absolute masterclass in character assassination. The motion officially claimed that I was mentally unstable, currently suffering from something he called chemotherapy-induced psychosis. It falsely claimed that my parents had completely exhausted all their liquid funds paying for my care, and that the hospital, specifically targeting Dr. Elijah, was maliciously manipulating a vulnerable, mentally ill young man to milk the grieving family for unnecessary, highly experimental treatments just to pad the hospital's billing department. They were actively trying to discredit my sanity so the judge would completely throw out my testimony and drop the case. Can they actually do this? I asked, my hands physically shaking in unadulterated rage. Can they just lie to a judge like this? They can try, Gabriel said calmly, though his eyes were fierce. It's a classic dirty smear campaign. They want to make it look like a tragic, emotional family disagreement rather than calculated financial abuse. They are banking entirely on the judge feeling sorry for the grieving, broke parents. I felt a massive wave of despair wash over me. I was so exhausted. My body was fighting an aggressive cancer, and now my mind had to fight my own flesh and blood in a vicious legal arena. But I wasn't entirely alone. The hospital staff had fiercely rallied around me. Word had gotten out among the nurses about exactly what my parents were trying to do. That afternoon, a young woman walked cautiously into my room. It was Chloe, a girl I worked closely with at the logistics firm. We weren't incredibly close, mostly just shared complaints by the office coffee machine, but she looked absolutely furious. Hey Mason, Chloe said, dropping a heavy tote bag on a chair. So, I heard your parents are absolute garbage. I let out a weak, highly surprised laugh. Yeah, pretty much. Well, the whole office found out, she said, pulling out her laptop. When HR got the official notice that your family was trying to legally terminate your health coverage, my manager stepped in, and I set up a GoFundMe. We circulated it through our entire corporate network. The logistics community is tight. She turned the glowing screen toward me. The GoFundMe page was titled, Help Mason Beat Cancer and Beat the Odds. The donation total sat at $15,000. It had been active for less than 24 hours. It won't cover everything, Chloe said softly, her eyes shining with unshed tears. But it will cover your immediate lawyer fees and your living expenses once you get out of here. You aren't fighting this alone, Mason. Your real family is out here. I broke down. After days of holding on to pure, toxic rage, the simple act of genuine kindness from a coworker shattered my emotional defenses. The night before the crucial emergency court hearing, the hospital ward was eerily quiet. I was lying in bed, staring blankly at the ceiling, mentally rehearsing the miserable timeline of my life for the judge. I was terrified. If the judge actually bought David's disgusting lies about my mental state, I would be sent home with a bottle of painkillers and left to die. At exactly 11 p.m., my heavy wooden door swung open violently. Gabriel rushed in. He looked like an absolute madman. His tie was completely undone. His hair was a wild mess, and he was aggressively clutching a thick stack of highlighted papers. "Wake up," he said urgently, pulling a chair right up to the edge of my bed. His eyes were wide with a manic, terrifying kind of triumph. "Gabriel, what time is it?" I mumbled, trying to clear my chemo-addled head. "It doesn't matter. You need to listen to me carefully," he said, dropping the heavy stack of papers right onto my lap. As part of the mandatory financial discovery for tomorrow's hearing, the judge forced David to hand over your parents' complete, unredacted bank records for the last 5 years to prove their bogus claim of financial hardship. Okay, did they hide money? Oh, they hid money. But that's not the explosive part. Gabriel excitedly tapped a specific line on a bank statement from 3 years ago. I spent the last 6 hours manually combing through thousands of transactions. I noticed a highly suspicious, recurring payment. For $100, every single month without fail, going to an LLC I didn't recognize. I squinted at the paper in the dim light. What is it? A second mortgage? A secret investment property? Gabriel shook his head, leaning in uncomfortably close. His voice dropped to a harsh whisper, thick with absolute disgust. It's a premium payment, Mason. I dug deeply into the LLC. It's a shell subsidiary holding company for a major life insurance firm. My brain struggled to keep up with his pace. Life insurance? For who? My dad. No, Gabriel said, his eyes locking intensely onto mine. For you. A cold, terrifying chill swept through the room, settling deep into my bones. I contacted a buddy of mine who works in high-level fraud investigations at that specific insurance firm. Gabriel continued, his words coming incredibly fast now. He pulled the confidential file. 3 years ago, right after you moved out of their house, your parents took out a massive life insurance policy on you. They are the sole beneficiaries. I stopped breathing entirely. How much? $500,000. The room started to violently spin. They had a $500,000 policy on my life. But it gets so much worse, Gabriel said, his voice trembling with a sickening mixture of professional awe and personal horror. My buddy checked the active claims database. 2 weeks ago, right after your cancer diagnosis was confirmed as highly aggressive, your parents submitted preliminary paperwork to the insurance company. They formally requested information on the expedited payout process for an impending claim. They didn't just want to stop paying for my treatment to simply save money. They wanted me to die so they could cash in on my life. They were going to use the $500,000 blood money to easily fund Carter's Columbia tuition, his lavish lifestyle, and probably their own luxury retirement. I wasn't just a financial burden to them. I was their biggest financial asset, and my death was their ultimate payday. I looked at Gabriel, the initial shock slowly morphing into a cold, terrifying, utterly ruthless clarity. "Call your witness?" I whispered, my voice sounding like it belonged to a total stranger. "Tomorrow we burn them to the ground." The morning of the emergency hearing was bitterly cold. Gabriel pushed my wheelchair into the heavy mahogany doors of the family courthouse. I was physically exhausted, my bones aching from the aggressive leukemia and the delayed chemotherapy cycle, but my mind was sharper than it had ever been. I wore a simple button-down shirt that hung loosely on my shrinking frame. I didn't need to dress up to look like a victim. The reality of my failing body did all the talking. My parents were already seated at the defense table. Evelyn wore a conservative, expensive navy suit, her hair perfectly styled, looking every bit the tragic, upper-middle-class mother. Arthur sat next to her, staring blankly at his legal pad. Next to them was David, their high-priced lawyer, who exuded a sickening aura of arrogant confidence. They didn't even look at me when Gabriel wheeled me to the plaintiff's table. Judge Matthew, a stern-faced man with decades of experience dealing with broken families, called the courtroom to order. He looked down at the massive stack of emergency filings Gabriel had submitted the night before, his expression unreadable. Gabriel wasted absolutely no time. He called Dr. Elijah to the stand first. Dr. Elijah marched up to the witness box wearing his pristine white hospital coat, carrying my thick medical file. He didn't look nervous. He looked furious. Gabriel asked him to outline my exact medical status. Dr. Elijah spoke clearly and authoritatively, stripping away all the legal jargon. He explained to the judge that my acute leukemia was incredibly aggressive but was responding miraculously well to the current protocol. He showed the charts. He pointed to the rapidly decreasing blast cell counts. He made it undeniably clear that I was on a direct path to total remission. Then Gabriel asked the critical question. "Dr. Elijah, what happens if Mason's family successfully terminates his funding and we are forced to stop the chemotherapy today?" Dr. Elijah leaned into the microphone. "Mason will die. The cancer will aggressively rebound within weeks, immune to future treatments. Stopping his care right now is not a financial decision. It is a death sentence. It is medically catastrophic." David stood up for his cross-examination, buttoning his expensive suit jacket. He tried his best to patronize the doctor. He asked leading questions, trying to paint Dr. Elijah as a greedy hospital administrator pushing experimental, costly treatments on a dying boy just to pad the billing department's numbers. He argued that my parents had simply run out of liquid cash, that they had exhausted their salaries and savings, and that protecting my brother Carter's college fund was a completely reasonable financial boundary for a family facing bankruptcy. David even brought up the luxury car. "Your Honor," David said smoothly, "the plaintiff has made wild accusations regarding a vehicle purchased for his brother. That car was bought using a separate, long-term savings account specifically designated for Carter's graduation. It has absolutely nothing to do with Mason's medical custody or his treatment costs. My clients are simply out of money." I watched my mother nod in agreement, dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue. They truly believed they were going to get away with it. They thought their pristine reputation and David's slick words would overshadow the truth. They had no idea what Gabriel was holding in his briefcase. Gabriel stood up for his redirect. He didn't look at David and he didn't look at my parents. He looked directly at Judge Matthew. "Your Honor," Gabriel said, his voice ringing loud and clear in the quiet courtroom. "The defense claims my clients are entirely out of funds. They claim they are making a tragic but necessary financial decision to protect their remaining assets and Carter's college fund. I would like to call our next witness to the stand, Mr. Aaron Vance." My parents exchanged a confused glance. David frowned, quickly flipping through his copy of the witness list. Aaron, a nervous-looking man in a wrinkled suit, walked through the double doors and took the oath. He worked as a senior claims investigator for one of the largest life insurance companies in the country. Gabriel approached the podium holding a single, highlighted document. "Mr. Vance, Gabriel started. Could you please verify your employer and your specific role? Aaron cleared his throat. I am a senior investigator in the Fraud and Early Claims Division for National Heritage Life Insurance. Gabriel handed the highlighted document to the court bailiff, who passed it to Judge Matthew. Mr. Vance, can you confirm the details of the policy outlined in that document? Yes, Aaron said, adjusting his glasses. This is a whole life insurance policy taken out 3 years ago. The insured party is Mason. The primary policyholders and sole beneficiaries are Arthur and Evelyn. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the courtroom. I looked over at my parents' table. My father's face completely drained of color, turning a sickly, ashen gray. My mother froze, the tissue halfway to her face, her eyes wide with sudden, absolute terror. And what is the exact payout amount of this policy upon Mason's death? Gabriel asked, his voice sharp as a razor. The death benefit is $500,000, Aaron stated clearly. Judge Matthew physically recoiled. He looked up from the document, his eyes darting between Aaron and my parents. The sheer magnitude of the number echoed off the wood-paneled walls. $500,000. Mr. Vance, one final question, Gabriel said, leaning heavily against the podium, preparing to deliver the killing blow. Has there been any recent activity on this specific policy? Aaron nodded. Yes. 2 weeks ago, the beneficiaries submitted a formal inquiry. They requested the exact timeline and the required medical documentation needed to expedite a death benefit claim. They specifically asked if an attending physician's note stating that further treatment was futile would speed up the payout process. The courtroom erupted. David jumped to his feet, shouting objections, his face flushed red with panic. He clearly had no idea this policy existed. My parents had lied to their own lawyer. Judge Matthew slammed his gavel down so hard the sound cracked like a gunshot. Overruled. Sit down, counselor, the judge roared, his face entirely red with genuine fury. He turned his burning gaze directly onto my parents. Gabriel didn't even need to make a closing argument. The truth was entirely bare. My parents didn't just want to save money on medical bills. They had actively calculated the value of my life versus the value of my death. They wanted to force me into hospice, get a doctor to sign off on my impending death, and cash a $500,000 check. They were going to use my blood money to pay for Carter's Ivy League tuition, his luxury lifestyle, and their own pristine reputation. They were orchestrating a murder by financial neglect. Evelyn buried her face in her hands, but she wasn't crying. She was hiding. Arthur stared straight ahead, completely paralyzed by the exposure of his own monstrous greed. The mask had permanently slipped, and the whole world finally saw the monsters they truly were. Before Judge Matthew could issue his ruling, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. Everyone turned around. Carter was standing there. He was breathing heavily, like he had sprinted all the way from the parking lot. He didn't look like the golden child today. He looked terrified, exhausted, and remarkably brave. He walked straight down the center aisle, bypassing my parents' table entirely, and stood behind the small wooden gate separating the gallery from the court floor. Your Honor, Carter said, his voice shaking violently. I need to say something. I have evidence. David immediately jumped up. Objection. This young man is not on the witness list. This is highly irregular. I don't care, Judge Matthew snapped, pointing his gavel at David. I want to hear exactly what he has to say. Bailiff, swear the boy in. Carter took the stand. He wouldn't look at our parents. He kept his eyes locked firmly on his hands. Gabriel stepped back, allowing Carter the space to speak. My parents told me Mason was dying and there was nothing anyone could do, Carter began, his voice gaining a fraction of strength. They told me the hospital was just stringing him along to drain my college fund. I believed them. I always believed them. But after Mason confronted me at the hospital, I started digging. I listened in on their conversations. Carter pulled his smartphone out of his pocket. Aunt Sarah came over 2 nights ago. They were drinking wine in the kitchen. I left my phone recording on the counter. Judge Matthew nodded, instructing the bailiff to take the phone and connect it to the court's audio system. A few seconds later, the scratchy, undeniable audio filled the room. It was my mother's voice. David says we just need to play the grieving parents. The judge will buy it. Once the court order is denied, the hospital will be forced to discharge him. We bring him home, call hospice, and it's over in a month. The insurance payout will clear the week after the funeral. We can finally secure Carter's future and be done with this nightmare. Then, Aunt Sarah's voice chimed in. It's a blessing in disguise, Evelyn. Mason was always a difficult child. You're just making the responsible choice for the son who actually has a future. The recording clicked off. The absolute depravity of their words hung in the air like toxic smoke. Planning my funeral. Securing the inheritance. Calling my death a blessing in disguise. Evelyn let out a sharp, pathetic wail. Arthur finally broke his silence, burying his face in his hands and sobbing. Carter stepped down from the stand, tears streaming down his face, and walked over to my table. He didn't say a word, but he placed his hand firmly on my shoulder. He had finally chosen a side. Judge Matthew didn't need to deliberate. He didn't even leave the bench. He looked down at my parents with a level of disgust that was palpable. In my 30 years on the bench, I have never witnessed a more vile, calculated, and breathtakingly cruel display of parental abuse. Judge Matthew said, his voice echoing with absolute authority. You did not just abandon your son. You actively plotted to profit from his agonizing death. He banged his gavel. I am immediately granting the plaintiff's emergency petition for full medical and financial emancipation. Arthur and Evelyn, you are entirely stripped of any legal authority over Mason. Furthermore, I am ordering the immediate unfreezing of Mason's contributed salary from the family health savings account to be transferred entirely to an independent trust. I am also forwarding the transcripts of this hearing, along with the audio recording and the life insurance documents, directly to the district attorney's office for a full criminal investigation into attempted insurance fraud and medical endangerment. This is the moment that changes everything. The exact moment I finally took back control of my life from the people who wanted to sell it. Thank you so much for your patience and for staying with me until now. You've been absolutely amazing. Please give this video a like and comment the number 1 below to let me know you've made it this far. Not only does this help more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences truly mean something to someone out there. Your support is my greatest motivation to keep sharing the rest of this journey. The moment the gavel fell, the heavy, suffocating weight I had carried for 24 years simply vanished. Gabriel gripped my shoulder, a massive grin on his face. We had won. We had completely destroyed their perfect facade. Gabriel wheeled me out of the courtroom and into the wide, marble-floored hallway. The adrenaline that had kept me upright during the hearing was rapidly crashing, leaving me dizzy and nauseous, but I felt incredibly light. Before we could reach the elevators, the heavy courtroom doors burst open behind us. Mason! Mason! Please wait. It was Evelyn. She was practically sprinting down the hallway, her expensive heels clicking frantically against the marble. Her perfect hair was a mess, her makeup smeared across her cheeks. Arthur was trailing a few steps behind her, looking completely shattered, like a man walking to his own execution. Gabriel immediately stepped in front of my wheelchair, holding up a firm hand. That is close enough, Evelyn. The judge made his ruling entirely clear. Evelyn ignored him, dropping to her knees right in front of my wheelchair. She grabbed my frail hands, her tears soaking into my skin. It was the exact same dramatic performance she had given on my first day in the hospital, but this time the audience wasn't buying it. Mason, please, you have to understand, she sobbed, her voice echoing loudly in the corridor. We were just so terrified. The medical debt, the pressure, the fear of losing everything. We panicked. We made a terrible, stupid mistake. But we love you. You are my baby. Please don't let them send us to jail. Please talk to the district attorney. I looked down at the woman who gave birth to me. I searched her eyes for any trace of genuine remorse, any hint of actual maternal love. But all I saw was a desperate, cornered animal terrified of the consequences of her own actions. She wasn't crying because she almost killed me. She was crying because she got caught. I slowly pulled my hands out of her desperate grip. "You planned my funeral, Mom," I said. My voice was quiet, steady, and completely devoid of any emotion. "You sat in your beautiful kitchen, drinking wine, and you calculated how many days it would take me to suffocate to death so you could cash a check. You didn't panic. You plotted." Arthur finally stepped forward, his voice cracking. "Son, please, we can fix this. We can pay for the treatments. We can sell the house. Just call off the district attorney." "I don't have a father," I replied, looking directly through him. "And I don't have a mother. I am officially emancipated. If either of you ever tries to contact me, approach me, or interfere with my life again, Gabriel will have you arrested for violating the restraining order Judge Matthew is signing right now." I looked up at Gabriel and nodded. He turned my wheelchair around and pushed me toward the elevators. I didn't look back. I heard Evelyn scream my name, a horrible, gut-wrenching sound, followed by the heavy thud of Arthur collapsing against the marble wall. It was the sound of their perfect, wealthy, highly curated lives completely imploding. And for the first time in my life, it wasn't my problem to fix. The ride back to the hospital in the medical transport van felt entirely different than the ride there. The sun was breaking through the thick winter clouds, casting bright, warm light across the city streets. I was exhausted to my very core, but my mind was completely at peace. When Gabriel wheeled me back onto the oncology ward, the nurses actually stopped what they were doing and clapped. Word had spread fast. Dr. Elijah was waiting outside my room, a massive smile breaking through his usually serious demeanor. "Welcome back, Mason," Dr. Elijah said, holding the door open for me. "Let's get you hooked back up. We have a cancer to kill." I settled back into my hospital bed, and for the first time in weeks, the sterile sheets felt incredibly comfortable. An hour later, Wyatt, the social worker, walked in carrying a thick folder. "Good news," Wyatt said, pulling up a chair and slapping the folder onto my lap. "Because Judge Matthew officially emancipated you and documented the extreme financial abuse, we were able to fast-track your Medicaid application under the Emergency Vulnerability Clause. It was approved 20 minutes ago." I stared at the paperwork, my eyes watering. "What does that mean?" "It means you don't owe the hospital a single dime for anything moving forward," Wyatt explained, his voice filled with genuine warmth. "Medicaid covers the bulk of the treatments, and the hospital's Charity Care Foundation voted this morning to completely wipe out any remaining deductibles or out-of-pocket costs. The money recovered from your stolen health savings account is securely locked in a private trust for your living expenses when you leave here. You are completely financially free." The heavy, suffocating anchor that had been dragging me underwater finally snapped. I wasn't going to die because of a missed payment. I wasn't a burden to anyone. Christian, the head floor nurse who had been bringing me extra blankets and sneaking me good coffee for weeks, came in to restart my 4-drip. He carefully cleaned the port, his hands gentle and precise. "You did good today, kid," Christian said softly, hooking up the clear bag of life-saving chemicals. "You fought the hardest battle outside of your own body, and you won. Now all you have to do is let us take care of the rest. You just rest." I closed my eyes as the cool liquid started flowing into my veins. I didn't have to fight my family anymore. I didn't have to constantly look over my shoulder or justify my existence. I was safe. I took a deep, shuddering breath, and for the first time since the day I was diagnosed, I fell into a deep, dreamless, incredibly peaceful sleep. 8 months later, the hospital hallway was lined with smiling doctors, nurses, and staff members. I stood at the end of the corridor, my hair starting to grow back in thick, curly patches, a healthy flush finally returning to my cheeks. I reached out and grabbed the braided rope attached to the brass bell mounted on the wall. I pulled it hard. The loud, clear ringing echoed down the hallway, followed by a massive eruption of cheering and applause. I had officially finished my final round of chemotherapy. My latest bone marrow biopsy showed absolutely zero trace of leukemia cells. I was in total, complete remission. I had literally beaten death. Gabriel, Wyatt, and Dr. Elijah were all standing in the front row, clapping loudly. But the person who gave me the biggest hug was Chloe. She had taken the afternoon off work to drive me to this final appointment. Life had changed drastically over those 8 months. Using the money recovered from the family trust and the generous GoFundMe donations Chloe had organized, I rented a small, beautiful, sunlit apartment on the other side of the city. It was the very first place I had ever lived that felt entirely like mine. No hand-me-down furniture, no walking on eggshells, no fear. During the later, easier stages of my recovery, I had started working remotely again. The tech logistics firm had been incredibly supportive. Chloe, who had practically become my unofficial sister, helped me navigate the corporate politics from my laptop in my hospital bed. Because I had continued to optimize their supply chain algorithms while hooked up to an 4-pole, upper management took serious notice. A week before I rang the remission bell, my director called me. Not only did they welcome me back to full-time status, but they also gave me the massive promotion I had been working toward before my diagnosis. I was officially a senior systems analyst, complete with a salary bump that guaranteed I would never have to worry about rent or groceries again. I had built the life I always wanted, and I had done it entirely without my parents' help. While my life was rapidly ascending, my parents' lives were violently spiraling into a spectacular, well-deserved abyss. I didn't go out of my way to check on them, but in our hyper-connected world, news travels fast, especially when it involves wealthy people falling from grace. The district attorney hadn't taken Judge Matthews' referral lightly, because the insurance policy crossed state lines and involved attempting to defraud a major financial institution through medical endangerment. The investigation was aggressive and incredibly public. Detectives had shown up at my father's corporate office with a search warrant, seizing his computers and files. The public humiliation was absolute. He was immediately placed on unpaid administrative leave, and shortly after, he was quietly forced to resign to protect the company's reputation. Without his massive salary, the fragile house of cards they had built their luxurious lifestyle upon completely collapsed. The legal bills to defend themselves against the fraud charges were astronomical. David, their slick lawyer, demanded huge retainers that they could no longer afford. To avoid prison time, they were forced into a devastating plea deal that required them to pay massive fines and accept years of heavily supervised probation. The financial ruin was absolute. The bank foreclosed on the pristine suburban house I had grown up in. The luxury country club memberships were revoked. And the ultimate poetic irony? The jet black Porsche 911 they had purchased for Carter was abruptly repossessed by the dealership because they couldn't make the massive monthly payments. The stress of the scandal and the crushing debt shattered their marriage. Rumors of a bitter, highly contested divorce circulated through the family grapevine. And Aunt Sarah, the woman who had happily encouraged them to let me die and called my death a blessing, she entirely cut ties with them the moment the police got involved, publicly claiming she had absolutely no idea what they were planning. They were left with nothing. No money, no status, no house, and no family. They had gambled their son's life for financial gain, and they had lost absolutely everything. One quiet Saturday afternoon, there was a tentative knock on my apartment door. I opened it to find Carter standing in the hallway. He looked entirely different. The designer hoodies and expensive sneakers were gone. He was wearing a faded, generic t-shirt, standard blue jeans, and a dark green apron with a local grocery store logo printed on the front. He looked tired, but his eyes were clear, lacking the constant, anxious energy he used to carry. "Hey, Mason," Carter said, shifting nervously from foot to foot. "I know I shouldn't just show up, but I wanted to make sure you were okay. I heard you finished the treatments." I stepped back and opened the door wider, gesturing for him to come inside. "I'm good, Carter. Come on in." He walked into my living room, looking around at the simple, clean furniture and the sunlight pouring through the windows. He sat down on the edge of the sofa, twisting the strings of his apron. "I didn't go to Columbia," Carter blurted out, staring at the coffee table. I sat down across from him, genuinely surprised. What happened? Did the scandal affect your admission? No. He shook his head slowly. The school never officially pulled it. Pulled it. After the court hearing, after hearing that audio recording of Mom and Aunt Sarah, I couldn't do it. I couldn't pack my bags and go live in a luxury dorm in New York knowing that the tuition money was supposed to be your blood money. It made me feel sick to my stomach. He looked up at me, his eyes full of a strange, new maturity. I moved out the day the house was foreclosed. I didn't take a dime from them. I enrolled at the local community college, and I've been working full-time at the grocery store down the street to pay my own rent. It's incredibly hard. I'm exhausted all the time, but for the first time in my entire life, I actually feel clean. I listened to him, the golden child who had voluntarily walked away from the throne. He had recognized the incredibly toxic cycle our parents had created, and he had chosen to break it just like I did. We had both been victims of their terrible parenting, just weaponized in entirely different ways. I was the scapegoat and he was the shiny trophy. But sitting here in my apartment, we were just two young men trying to figure out how to live decent lives. It gets easier, I told him, offering a small, genuine smile. Working for your own life. It gets much easier when you realize nobody can ever hold it over your head. Carter nodded, a tentative smile breaking across his tired face. We spent the next 2 hours just talking. Not about the cancer or the court case or our ruined parents. We talked about his annoying store manager, my new coding projects, and the terrible traffic in the city. We were slowly, carefully, figuring out how to be brothers for the very first time. Before Carter left that evening, I walked him to the door. As he was putting on his jacket, he paused, looking at a small, dedicated shelf I had set up near the entryway of my apartment. On the top shelf, sitting perfectly in the center, was the faded, slightly scratched plastic science fair trophy I had carried home in the freezing rain when I was 8 years old. Next to it was the crisp, perfectly preserved acceptance letter to the MIT summer coding boot camp that I never got to attend. And right beside that, neatly framed in simple black wood, was the official court order signed by Judge Matthew granting my medical emancipation, right next to the pristine hospital document declaring my total remission from leukemia. These weren't just random items. They were the undeniable physical proof of my entire survival. They were the monuments to every single time the people who were supposed to fiercely protect me had completely abandoned me, and the absolute proof that I had aggressively saved myself anyway. I stepped back and looked at that small shrine. It was so incredibly different from the massive, obnoxious shrine my parents had built for Carter in their living room all those years ago. Theirs was a monument to their own massive egos, built entirely on expectations, pressure, and control. Mine was a quiet, undeniable celebration of pure resilience. It proved that I had always been entirely worth fighting for, even when I had to be the only person doing the fighting. The family you are born into is nothing more than a biological accident. True family isn't defined by shared DNA or last names. True family is defined by the people who choose to stay by your hospital bed when the machines are beeping. It's the people who hand you a sword when you are too weak to lift your own. It's the doctors, the social workers, the incredibly loud lawyers, the coworkers who barely know you but donate their paychecks anyway. That is what love actually looks like. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. I know it was incredibly heavy, but I hope this resonated with you in some way. I hope it reminds you that your worth is never determined by the people who fail to see it. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation, where you had to fiercely protect yourself from the people closest to you? I would genuinely love to read your stories in the comments. Also, if you are still here listening to my voice right now, you are part of a very special group. Please comment the letter W below. W stands for winner. It's the secret code for the 1% Club, the amazing people who stay until the very end and truly understand the whole picture. It's our little signal. Please don't forget to hit the like button and follow the channel so we can stay connected. I have so many more stories to share, and I want you to be here for all of them. Until next time, stay strong, trust your gut, and never, ever let anyone else decide the value of your life.